21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and after changing my diet and my diet alone, within 2 months, all my symptoms resolved and my inflammation went down by over 90%. When I was 35, I was having some digestive issues. I went to my gastroenterologist, had a colonoscopy, and he diagnosed me with Crohn's disease. And once he showed me the pictures of my colon, I saw them and I just wept. And I felt a determination at that point to not only heal from this, but to be healthier than I ever was before. I really wanted to understand what the root cause of Crohn's disease was so that I could control it and I could stop feeling the pain that I was in. Well, after I talked to my doctor, he recommended that I go on a drug called Entyvio, but because of a very bad experience I had in college where a doctor told me to take anti-inflammatories for carpal tunnel, I decided to try to come up with a more natural solution to try to figure out what the root cause was. And I went to a functional medicine doctor. His name was Dr. Garcia, and he told me about the autoimmune protocol, which is an elimination diet that eliminates potential trigger foods like dairy, gluten, nightshades, seed oils, food additives, basically all the top 9 allergens plus nightshades, and you eat no processed foods. And once I was 100% compliant with the diet, the results were dramatic and almost immediate. And within 2 months, all my symptoms resolved and my inflammation went down by over 90%. And when I went back to my doctor, I showed him my results and he looked at my blood test results, stool test results. My C-reactive protein went down by over 90%, my lactoferrin, calprotectin. He's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Which medication are you on? And I said, no medication. He's like, no. Which treatment are you on? And I said, no treatment. And he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, I'm doing the autoimmune protocol diet. And he said, wow, if you had these results and you were on the medication, I would be ecstatic. And I asked him, well, why didn't you tell me about the diet? Why did I have to learn about the diet from a functional medicine doctor? And he said, well, 40 years ago when I went to med school, they gave me a book this thick and only one page was on nutrition. And I'm not a dietitian. And in the last 40 years, I've only had one other patient who has had a similar result as you. And I even did a colonoscopy on him and his gut had completely healed. However, he got tired of the diet. And after a few months or maybe a year, he went back to eating the foods he was eating before and his symptoms came back with a vengeance. And eventually I ended up putting him on medication. And I don't believe that the diet is sustainable. And so I don't recommend the diet to anybody. And I took that in and I really kind of thought about it. And I kind of tucked it away for later. But it also occurred to me that if I had been diagnosed with celiac disease instead of Crohn's disease, he would have told me to do the gluten-free diet. And that's now the standard of care for celiac disease, which is another autoimmune disease. But for Crohn's disease, he was not recommending a dietary approach. He was only recommending medication. And I didn't really understand at the time what was so different about Crohn's disease and celiac disease. For the next 3 years or so, I cooked all my own meals from scratch, and I had a full-time job. I was working on 2 startups on the side. My wife was a stay-at-home. She cooked all the meals. You know, she'd make me lunch, put little love notes in my lunch, or we would eat out. And I had to go from that experience to learning how to cook food from scratch and looking for recipes online for the AIP diet, which are not like recipes for other diets. You can't use tomatoes, you can't use any prepackaged ingredients. You have to cook everything from scratch. It was extremely daunting. There were days where I didn't have time. I would just eat a can of tuna and some rice while my family was eating In-N-Out or whatever their favorite foods are. But I had made this commitment to myself, um, and I was determined to get healthy and stay healthy and live symptom-free without medication. My brother also has Crohn's disease, and he was diagnosed about 15 years before I was. And I tried to encourage him to look for natural approaches, but he chose to go on the medication. And so once I was able to get my symptoms under control, I said, look, I can live symptom-free without medication. And so he asked me what I was eating, and I told him, and he said, you call that living? And I took that idea in as well and just kept going. Um, Later on, my father said to me, if there's one thing that you could do for me, it would be to get your brother to do the diet. Because what can happen to people, it doesn't happen necessarily after 1 year or 2 years or even 5 years, but these medications can cause liver damage. They can cause kidney damage. They suppress your immune system. My brother had shingles when he was in his 20s, and they can shorten your life by 10, 20, 30 years in some cases. And my father just said, please do something to get your brother to do the diet. But I know he won't do the diet unless the food tastes good. After I had success in my career as a serial entrepreneur, I tried to think what would make the biggest improvement to my life and my lifestyle, and it was the quality of my food. So I thought maybe I'll, uh, look for a chef. And I also only had two dreams in my life, two goals. One was to get a beach house, and the second one was to get a personal chef to make my food. And I was talking to one of my best friends, and he asked me what my goals are now that I had, some success in my career. And I told him my two dreams, and he said, well, how much would it cost you to get a private chef? And I said, I don't really know. I haven't really looked into it. And so he challenged me. He said, well, don't you think you should find out? So I started going on all these different websites. I went on meetachef.com, Take a Chef, Kitchen Remedy, and talked to a bunch of different chefs. And I said, I want you to make me my favorite dishes. Chicken tikka masala is my favorite dish, but they have to be compliant with the diet. And the chef said, that's impossible. You're crazy. You can't make tikka masala without nightshades, without dairy, without all these spices. And so I said, next. Then I started talking to some other chefs, and they said, well, I've never made tikka masala like that before, but I'm willing to try it. And I paid them. They made it. It tasted nothing like tikka masala. And so I just said, okay, let's keep going. And eventually I was introduced to my co-founder, Suhan, and he had this amazing background. He went to the International Culinary Center in New York. He worked as a saucier in 6 Michelin star restaurants. He worked in the executive dining program at JP Morgan for 6 years and made meals for the CEO, Jamie Dimon, US presidents, and foreign dignitaries. And he also had his own private chefing business where he made meals for affluent people in Long Island, some of whom had Crohn's disease. And so he had already had experience making sauces like this before. So I said, make me 3 sauces in 3 months, but one of them has to be tikka masala, and the other two can be whatever you want. And after 3 months, he gave me the tikka masala. I tasted it, and it took me back to my first date with my wife at my favorite Indian restaurant. And it was the first time I experienced that memory through my taste buds in over 6 years. And my daughter and I, we love watching the movie Ratatouille. And I'm like the mouse, but I can't cook. I like to smell all my food. And there's this one scene in the movie where Igor he's riding the bike and when he was a child, and he falls off, and his mom makes him ratatouille. And when Igor takes the bite of the ratatouille, it brings him back to that memory. And that's how I felt after trying Suhan's tikka masala. And so in addition to making tikka masala, I had asked him to make me 3 sauces, 2 other sauces. He made me a total of 8 sauces. And so at that moment, I knew he was the right person to partner with. And then I had to convince him to quit his job and come work for Get Saucy full time, which was not that easy to do and took many, many months to convince him. But ultimately, he decided to come on board, and we formed the company. And that's part of the story of how we got to where we are today. About a month ago, we went to the Future Food Tech Conference, and we were part of the Food as Medicine track. And while we were there, we had a couple very interesting experiences. So first, the executive chef from the Marriott Marquis Hotel said, "Oh my gosh, this product is amazing. I had an Indian family come visit a couple weeks ago, and they called in-room dining, and they told us that they had a bunch of food allergies, and we didn't know what to do. It was like a fire drill. We were all stressed out. We didn't want to make something that didn't taste good, and we didn't want to make something that would trigger their allergies. So they looked at our product and they said, wow, I would love to have a case of your product on hand in case they come back again." In addition to that experience, a group came to us that represents senior living facilities, and they said, "Your product looks amazing. A lot of our clients have a lot of food allergies and illnesses, and our staff doesn't know how to cook for them and make, healthy, good tasting food. So we're super excited about using your product." And it was at that time that I realized that there's the problem for consumers, which is a significant problem, might not be as big as the problem for the people who are making food and having to accommodate people like me. And that's why right now we're very, very focused on looking for people who want to partner with us and bring this to market, to bring the product where it's needed most. It could be with meal delivery companies, so people can order meals to their home that are compliant with their food allergies. It could be senior living facilities, hotels, airlines. When I fly, they'll have a kosher meal. They might have a gluten-free meal, but there's usually nothing I can eat except for maybe just some fruit, because none of the meals on the plane are something that are allergy friendly. I go to hotels, I have the same experience. I call in-room dining. They have to make me just maybe some steak and some rice and steamed vegetables because they don't have anything that they can make for me. And it's just not a great experience. I just want to feel normal like everybody else and have a seat at the table. And I think that with the help of people in food service or wherever they are, registered dietitians, bringing awareness to our products and getting our products into people's hands, we can make a real difference. After I sold my last company, I had the post-acquisition blues. And if you've ever sold a company, you probably know what I'm talking about. You should be really, really happy. You accomplished your goal, you got to a certain amount of revenue, a certain level of success, and someone else wanted to buy it. But you feel the journey is over and you sort of lose your purpose in life. And I spent a lot of time, feeling down, a little bit depressed, not knowing what I should do next. A bunch of my friends said, well, you can't do startups anymore. You need to do something else because you've already done startups and you've already reached your goals. You need to go travel. You need to learn pottery. You need to do sailing. You need to buy a sailboat. Everybody was trying to give me advice on how to get out of my funk, if you will. But eventually I said, well, why do I have to do something different? Why can't I do startups? I love startups, and it's the only thing that I'm really, really good at. And then I started thinking about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and thinking about what's the hardest problem to solve. I have food, I have shelter, I have a wife, I have kids. I had all of my needs, most of my needs met, but the one need that wasn't being met was my need for fulfillment. And what I realized is that fulfillment is the hardest problem to solve. I cannot buy fulfillment, and I can't give my fulfillment to somebody else. We're all at the same level when it comes to fulfillment. We all have to earn it every day. And when I thought about, I watched this video, Y Combinator, about how to come up with startup ideas. And they said, think about every single problem that you've experienced in just your childhood, in your personal life, at school, as an adult, at work, and which of those problems has been solved, and which of those problems are you the most passionate about? And the one I wrote down 65 different ideas, and I went through them. A lot of them had been solved, but the one problem that I was very passionate about that hadn't yet been solved had to do with food for this particular diet. This was the problem, you know, I really wanted these products and they didn't exist. And I wish I had these products when I was first diagnosed. And I just kept coming back to that, despite the fact that I have no background whatsoever in consumer packaged goods. And I'm not a cook, I'm not a chef. Um, but this was the problem that I wanted to solve. Um, it just, it made me excited. It like a well of emotion would come up for me whenever I thought about this problem, especially since my daughter unfortunately inherited some of my horrible genetics, and she started having digestive issues, and she would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. She would come into my bathroom over here and she would be crying because she was in so much pain and praying to God that the pain would stop. And I felt at that moment that I have to do something about this because my daughter can't force herself to eat unpalatable food like I can. I have more discipline, I think, than the vast majority of the population, and I can force myself to eat food that doesn't taste very good, but she cannot. And it just, all these experiences kind of accumulating, and now it's for my daughter, so she can enjoy these foods for the rest of her life as well. What does the carnivore diet and the raw vegan diet have in common? And at first thought, most people have no idea. They seem like complete polar opposites. But a different way of thinking about it is that both diets have been used successfully to help modulate symptoms for autoimmune disease, and they both omit seed oils, fine sugar, and processed foods. They're both, if you were looking at a spectrum of whole foods to processed foods, they're both on the whole food side of the spectrum. So they're actually a lot closer than people would think. Humans, we're at the top of the food chain. We can eat many, many different types of foods and survive and even thrive. And there was a dentist named Weston A. Price who in the 1930s wanted to figure out why Americans get so many cavities. So he went on an epic journey all over the world. He spent time with Eskimos in Alaska, and they were mostly eating fish and thousands of calories a day. He visited African tribes that were drinking raw milk and drinking thousands of calories of milk a day to people who were on a mostly plant-based diet. And all of those groups, they had really good teeth. They didn't have floss. They didn't have sometimes toothbrushes or toothpaste or mouth rinses. And they there was a distinct absence of heart disease and diabetes that was becoming much more common in the United States. What do those diets all have in common? They all lack or omit processed foods. And in the 1930s, the only processed foods that they had were cottonseed oil and refined sugar. Today, we have so many more processed foods and we have a lot more different diseases and they're becoming even more prevalent. So the knowledge is actually there. We've had it for a long time, but it's just hasn't become mainstream. And one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing in this business is just creating awareness and education. So currently we have one sauce for sale, our tikka masala, and we started with that sauce because that's the sauce that started the whole company. And it's my favorite product of all the products that we have. The next two products that we'll be launching in the next couple months are our tomato-free marinara sauce and our taco seasoning. And by the end of this year, we will have 6 products. We'll have also our Thai curry sauce, our barbecue sauce, and salsa verde to go along with the tacos. The idea is to eventually have ready-made sauces, seasonings, condiments, and dressings that cover global cuisine, so you could have a different meal for lunch and dinner every single day of the week, and none of them will trigger your food allergies. In addition to having them, we're going to sell them on our website, on Amazon. We'll be launching on Amazon in a couple weeks, and we do eventually want to get into retail, but because of the feedback that we've been receiving from the market, that people who work in hotels, people who work in senior living facilities, etc., and airlines, that they're very interested in using our products, we're going to move into food service. We want the products to be ubiquitous and to be available to people wherever they are, and to help the people who provide the food to people with allergies to make their lives easier. You know, it helps them reduce safety risk, reputational risk. If I make the food for myself and it doesn't taste good, I'm not going to write a Yelp review for myself. But if I pay someone to make me food and it makes me feel ill, there's cross-contamination, doesn't taste good, I might complain. And there's the problem for the food service providers is particularly acute and may even be a bigger problem than people making food for themselves at home. In addition to the United States, it turns out that about 10% of the population in the United Kingdom, in Denmark, in many other westernized countries are having similar issues with food allergies. And we've received interest from all these different countries. And so it's our hope that we'll eventually export products all over the world. And instead of what's happening today, which is we're exporting fast food like McDonald's and Coca-Cola and exporting diabetes and heart disease to the rest of the world, we can actually export health. We're looking for partners, people who want to partner with us, who own food service businesses, senior living facilities, hotels, both inside the US as well as abroad. We're currently talking to somebody in Kuwait right now who has a meal delivery program, and they do keto meals to your house and they're fresh and ready to go. And he wants to start offering a gluten-free, allergy-friendly meal program so people can just take out their credit card, sign up for the meal service, and that's how easy it is to be healthy. You know, medically tailored meals right to your home that taste delicious. And he was concerned that how am I going to accommodate all these different cuisines my staff doesn't have the ability to do it, my kitchen isn't ready for it, I don't have enough space. But with our products, with a relatively small investment of space and a little bit of training, he can launch a new program. We have spoken to people with 30 years of experience in this industry. And when I share with them some of the ideas I've shared today about Weston A. Price, about the autoimmune protocol, about how many of these autoimmune diseases are actually caused by food allergies, this is completely new information to them. There's people that I've met who their mom, their hand was crippled like this. They had rheumatoid arthritis. They stopped eating nightshades and their hand went back to normal and completely without medication. Plants developed a defense system to deter animals from eating them, and they produce certain toxins. And some humans are allergic to those toxins. And nightshades have a toxin called solanine. And this is just a part of the food theory and food system that most people aren't aware of. There are more and more people who have learned this concept of culinary medicine. And there's even a certification called culinary medicine and lifestyle medicine. So we've been focusing on reaching out to people who already are certified in those programs because they don't require any education. But in order to make the impact that we need to make, we need to empower and educate people who are in food service or, our dietitians and make this information ubiquitous. This is the key to, they call it health meets food. That's the term they use in culinary medicine. And it's not about supplements. It's not about taking vitamins. It's not about taking expensive biologics. We can save, $1 trillion a year or more in healthcare costs in the US alone by changing our food and making it tailored to people's individual sensibilities and allergies. On our website, we have a resources section where we have curated some of the most important research in the space. There's a website called Autoimmune Wellness that has cataloged and categorized all of the clinical trials that have been done for different diseases and how effective the autoimmune protocol has been. They also have taken a bunch of stories from people with a bunch of different diseases, Hashimoto's, lupus, ankylosing spondylitis, and how quickly my story is not unique. There's many other people who have similar stories that have recovered from even worse situations than I recovered from just by changing their diet and diet alone. And ankylosing spondylitis was the same disease that Luigi, I think his last name is Leone, who attacked that CEO and killed the CEO of United Health, Healthcare. It's an autoimmune disease that attacks your spine and causes back pain. And instead of his doctors telling him to change his diet, they did surgeries on his back. The insurance companies gave him the runaround. He was in so much pain and so much frustration that he made such an unfortunate decision. And if he had just changed his diet and avoided these food triggers, whatever they are for himself, his life and the life of that CEO may be entirely different today. Our sauces are easy to cook and delicious, but don't take my word for it. Go to our website and try them for yourself. And if you want to be part of the mission, come partner with us. Go to our website and go to our Partner With Us page, fill out our sign-up form, and let's go.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
Imagine a space where triumphs, trials, and tales of entrepreneurship come alive. Welcome to the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Podcast, a gold awarded journey hosted by Martin Piskorik, connecting with listeners in 95 countries and ranking in the top 0.5% of all podcasts. Join our exclusive community, elevate your perspective, and embark on the path to success.